of Pain by C.S. Lewis. Chapter 6 Human Pain. If pain sometimes shatters the creature's false self-sufficiency, yet in supreme trial or sacrifice, it teaches him the self-sufficiency which really ought to be his, the strength, which if heaven gave it may be called his own. For then, in the absence of all merely natural motives and supports, he acts in that strength and that alone which God confers upon him through his subjected will. Human will becomes truly creative and truly our own when it is wholly God's, and this is one of the many senses in which he that loses his soul shall find it. In all other acts, our will is fed through nature, that is, through created things other than the self, through the desires which our physical organism and our heredity supply to us. When we act from ourselves alone, that is, from God in ourselves, we are collaborators in or live instruments of creation. And that is why such an act undoes with backward mutters of discerning power the uncreative spell which Adam laid upon his species. Hence, as suicide is the typical expression of the Stoic spirit and battle of the warrior spirit, martyrdom always remains the supreme enacting and perfection of Christianity. This great action has been initiated for us, done on our behalf, exemplified for our imitation, and inconceivably communicated to all believers by Christ on Calvary. There, the degree of accepted death reaches the utmost bounds of the unimaginable and perhaps goes beyond them. Not only all natural supports, but the presence of the very Father to whom the sacrifice is made deserts the victim and surrenders to God, does not falter through God forsakes it. The doctrine of death, which I describe, is not peculiar to Christianity. Nature herself has written it large across the world in the repeated drama of the buried seed and the re-arising corn. From nature, perhaps the oldest agriculture communities learnt it, and with animal or human sacrifices showed forth for centuries the truth that without shedding of blood is no remission. And though at first such conceptions may have concerned only the crops and offspring of the tribe, they came later in the mysteries to concern the spiritual death and resurrection of the individual. The Indian ascetic, mortifying his body on a bed of spikes, preaches the same lesson. The Greek philosophers tell us that the life of wisdom is a practice of death. The sensitive and noble heathen of modern times makes his imagined gods die into life. Mr. Huxley expounds non-attachment. We cannot escape the doctrine by ceasing to be Christian. It is an eternal gospel revealed to men wherever men have sought or endured the truth. It is the very nerve of redemption which, anatomizing wisdom at all times and in all places, lays bare the unescapable knowledge which the light that lighteneth every man presses down upon the minds of all who seriously question what the universe is about. The peculiarity of the Christian faith is not to teach this doctrine but to render it, in various ways, more tolerable. Christianity teaches us that the terrible task has already, in some sense, been accomplished for us, that a master's hand is holding ours as we attempt to trace the difficult letters, and that our script need only be a copy, not the original. Again, where other systems expose our total nature to death, as in Buddhist renunciation. Christianity demands only that we set right a misdirection of our nature and has no quarrel, like Plato, with the body as such, nor with the physical elements in our makeup. And sacrifice in its most supreme realization is not exacted of all. Confessors as well as martyrs are saved, and some old people whose state of grace we can hardly doubt seem to have got through their 70 years surprisingly easy. The sacrifice of Christ is repeated or re echoed among his followers in very varying degrees, from the cruelest martyrdom down to a self submission of intention, whose outward signs have nothing to distinguish them from the ordinary fruits of temperance and sweet reasonableness. The causes of this distribution I do not know, but from our present point of view, it ought to be clear that the real problem is not why some humble, pious, believing people suffer, but why some do not. Our Lord Himself, it will be remembered, explained the salvation of those who are fortunate in this world only by referring to the unsearchable omnipotence of God. All arguments in the justification of suffering provoke bitter resentment against the author. You would like to know how I behave when I am experiencing pain, not writing books about it. You need not guess, for I will tell you, I am a great coward. But what is that to the purpose? When I think of pain, of anxiety that gnaws like fire, and loneliness that spreads out like a desert, and the heart-breaking routine of monotonous misery, or again of dull aches that blacken our whole landscape, or sudden nauseating pains that knock a man's heart out at one blow, of pains that seem already intolerable and then are suddenly increased, of infuriating scorpion stinging pains that startle into maniacal movements a man who seemed half dead with his previous tortures. It quite overcrows my spirit. If I knew any way of escape, I would crawl through sewers to find it. But what is the good of telling you about my feelings? You know them already. They are the same as yours. I am not arguing that pain is not painful. Pain hurts. That is what the word means. I am only trying to show that the old Christian doctrine of being made perfect through suffering is not incredible. To prove it palatable is beyond my design. In estimating the credibility of the doctrine, two principles ought to be observed. In the first place, we must remember that the actual moment of present pain is only the center of what may be called the whole tribulational system, which extends itself by fear and pity. Whatever good effects these experiences have are dependent upon a center, so that even if pain itself was of no spiritual value, yet if fear and pity were pain would have to exist in order that there should be something to be feared and pitied. And that fear and pity help us in our return to obedience and charity is not to be doubted. Everyone has experienced the effect of pity in making it easier for us to love the unlovely. That is, to love men not because they are in any way naturally agreeable to us, but because they are our brethren. The beneficence of fear most of us have learnt during the period of crisis that led up to the present war. My own experience is something like that. I'm progressing along the path of life in my ordinary, contentedly fallen and godless condition, absorbed in a merry meeting with my friends for the morrow, or a bit of work that tickles my vanity today. A holiday or a new book when suddenly a stab of abdominal pain that threatens serious disease, or a headline in the newspapers that threaten us all with destruction sends this whole pack of cards tumbling down. At first, I'm overwhelmed, and all my little happinesses look like broken toys. Then, slowly and reluctantly, bit by bit, I try to bring myself into the frame of mind that I should be in all at all times. I remind myself that all these toys were never intended to possess my heart, that my true good is in another world and my only real treasure is Christ. And perhaps, by God's grace, I succeed and for a day or two become a creature, consciously dependent on God and drawing its strength from the right sources. But the moment the threat is withdrawn, my whole nature leaps back to the toys. I am even anxious. God forgive me to banish from my mind the only thing that supported me under the threat because it is now associated with the misery of those days. Thus, the terrible necessity of tribulation is only too clear. God had me for but 48 hours and then only by dint of taking everything else away from me. Let him but sheathe that sword for a moment, and I behave like a puppy when the hated bath is over. I shake myself as dry as I can and race off to reacquire my comfortable dirtiness, if not in the nearest manure heap, at least in the nearest flower bed. And that is why tribulations cannot cease until God either sees us remade or sees that our remaking is now hopeless. In the second place, when we are considering pain itself, the center of the whole tribulation system, we must be careful to attend to what we know and not to what we imagine. That is one of the reasons why the whole center part of this book is devoted to human pain and animal pain is relegated to a special chapter. About human pain, we know. About animal pain, we only speculate. But even within the human race, we must draw our evidence from instances that have come under our own observation. The tendency of this or that novelist or poet may represent suffering as wholly bad in its effects, as producing and justifying every kind of malice and brutality in the sufferer. And of course, pain, like pleasure, can also be so received. All that is given to a creature with free will must be two edged, not by the nature of the giver or of the gift, but by the nature of the recipient. And again, the evil results of pain can be multiplied if sufferers are persistently taught by the bystanders that such results are the proper and manly results for them to exhibit. Indignation at others' sufferings, though a generous passion needs to be well managed, lest it steal away patience and humility from those who suffer and plant anger and cynicism in their stead. But I am not convinced that suffering, if spared such officious vicarious indignation, has any natural tendency to produce such evils. I did not find the front line trenches or the CCS more full than any other place of hatred, selfishness, rebellion, and dishonesty. I have seen great beauty of spirit in some who were great sufferers. I have seen men, for the most part, grow better, not worse, with advancing years, and I have seen the last illness produce treasures of fortitude and meekness from most unpromising subjects. I see in loved and reversed historical figures, such as Johnson and Cowper, traits which might scarcely have been tolerable if the men had been happier, if the world is indeed a vale of soul making. It seems, on the whole, to be doing its work. Of poverty, the affliction which actually or potentially includes all other afflictions, I would not dare to speak as from myself. And those who reject Christianity will not be moved by Christ's statement that poverty is blessed. But here, a rather remarkable fact comes to my aid. Those who would most scornfully repudiate Christianity as a mere opiate of the people have a contempt for the rich, that is, for all mankind except the poor. They regard the poor as the only people worth preserving from liquidation and place in them the only hope of human race. But this is not compatible with the belief that the effects of poverty on those who suffer it are wholly evil. It even implies that they are good. The Marxist thus finds himself in real agreement with the Christian in those two beliefs, which Christianity paradoxically demands, that poverty is blessed and yet ought to be removed.